Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers plan to interview former Eagles offensive coordinator Brian Johnson for their vacant offensive coordinator position, according to Jonathan Jones. Now, this is a name that a lot of Bucs fans are probably familiar with in recent memory. Brian Johnson was the OC for the Philadelphia Eagles when they just played against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the playoffs. You also take a look, he did play in Utah from 2004 to 2008. He's a former player in his own right as well. So, very interesting to see, a guy, former quarterback in Brian Johnson as well. We talked about Kellen Moore. Brian Johnson's another similar guy in that vein. A lot of people are going to be probably sour on Brian Johnson, considering the situation that happened in the playoffs, where, quite frankly, the offense was absolutely ineffective overall for the Eagles, and the second half collapse of the Eagles that had happened throughout the process. But I would say that, that shouldn't take entirely away from the positives of what Brian Johnson was able to do in his first year as a offensive coordinator in the NFL. I mean, you take a look, and this is a guy in Brian Johnson who, I think was able to do some pretty interesting things. The Philadelphia Eagles offense, they were still 8th in yards offensively this year, 7th in points for this year. You take a look at the passing and rushing, 16th in passing yards, 16th in passing touchdowns, 8th in rushing yards, 5th in rushing touchdowns. Like, there's a lot of good there. And people may say, well, he absolutely collapsed. It's also important to remember that Brian Johnson had this offense at a 10-1 record, a 10-1 record at week 12. That's pretty impressive. And yes, the offense did not do well throughout the second half of the year. I would say, there's a good bit of that is on Brian Johnson, but you also got to take the good with the bad. Another thing I want to talk about is Brian Johnson, was the quarterback's coach in 2021 and in 2022. It is a lot of good work with Jalen Hurts. He helped coach Jalen Hurts to some really, really good years. This year didn't go great in terms of overall play of Jalen Hurts. Again, 23 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. But 2022, a 14-1 record for Hurts. 22 touchdowns, 6 passing interceptions. In terms of rushing, things went well. 760 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns. I think that Brian Johnson's done some good stuff. Before that, he had done some really interesting things in the college levels. Quarterback's coach at Utah, OC at Utah, quarterback's coach at Mississippi State, OC at Houston, quarterback's coach at Florida, OC at Florida. Brian Johnson has worked with quarterbacks both collegiately and NFL now in multiple different ways at multiple different levels. And that's something that I think could benefit the Bucs. It's something that wanted to make them hire Dave Canales. That ended up going pretty well. I think something that is a benefit here to the Bucs is the extensive amount of offensive coordinator experience that Brian Johnson has, especially at a collegiate level and a little bit now at an NFL level. I think that makes him a valuable candidate. And his work with quarterbacks, I feel like, is also going to be something they're going to look at. I think you're going to look to partner up a guy with that type of expertise in quarterbacks. Brian Johnson, being a former player, having so much experience working with other quarterbacks, I think can be a benefit to a guy like Baker Mayfield. And while some people are going to maybe be sour on this and say, no way, they only scored 9 points against the Bucs in the wild card round. I mean, everybody thought that Brian Johnson was the bee's knees at week 12 when they were 10-1. And I don't think that it's important. I think it is important to not forget that and look at the entire context of how this year went. Did the Philadelphia Eagles have an absolute collapse in the second half of the year? Yes, we've talked about this. But I also wonder if Sirianni may have played a role in that. Sirianni does seem kind of like a guy who would maybe say if things aren't going his way, he may try and take things over. We don't know. If Brian Johnson does get control of an entire offense to himself and Todd Bowles says, hey man, this is your thing, go for it, would we see more of what the 10-1 Eagles were looking like versus this second half collapse? It's something to consider. I don't know. But I wouldn't completely dismiss the idea of Brian Johnson. I wouldn't necessarily say he'd be top 3 candidate for me, but I would not be mad if they hired Brian Johnson. I came away impressed with his work with Jalen Hurts as a quarterback's coach. Overall, I think he did a decent job as OC of the Philadelphia Eagles besides that second half collapse. And there's a lot of factors that go into that type of collapse, by the way. It's not just purely on a guy like Brian Johnson. The defense also had a lot to answer for in that collapse as well. So I would say, hey, definitely consider Brian Johnson. He's got previous experience both at collegiate and NFL level, former player, worked with quarterbacks a ton. I think he could be a strong benefit to Baker Mayfield. He's still very young, only 36 years old. I'd be down. I'd be down for a guy like Brian Johnson. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments section below. I would love to hear it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope y'all enjoyed. And as always, guys, I'll see you all in the next video or the next live stream. But until then, and as always, guys, goodbye for now, and go Bucs.